Good morning and welcome to the third annual Tri-Cities Chamber of Commerce Economic Summit, presented this year by EPR Coquitlam. You'll hear more about them in a few minutes. Reminder, there's seats up front here, nice comfortable theater seats. If you're crowded, come on, sit up front. Celia's getting a little lonely up there. She wants some company. Come on up front. That would be great. My name is Mike Hind. I'm the CEO of the Tri-Cities Chamber of Commerce, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here this morning, bright and early. We're really excited about our gathering today. It's the third annual, as I said, and we got some great internationally renowned business minds here today for you to hear. On the back of your programs, there are instructions how to access what we call Slido, and it'll come up on the screen thereafter, and that's how you ask questions of the panelists. Now, Dr. Cooper is going to take some questions afterwards, after her presentation, but I'll just go around with a mic and we'll pick out a couple questions from the crowd. But for the other ones, just go to slido.com, type in the event code, which is TCC Summit, select your desired panel, and ask your question you want to vote on. So that's how we ask questions. We use it at all candidates' debates. It worked out really well. We have some VIPs in the room today that I want to introduce, and I'll start with the acting mayor for Port Coquitlam, Mr. Glenn Pollock's here. Glenn, thank you. From Coquitlam, we have Mayor Richard Stewart, Councillors Benita Zarrillo and Terry Towner. From Port Moody, Councillor Zoe Roy is with us. Zoe, thanks for coming out. From the burgeoning metropolis of Anmore, the mayor, the tallest mayor in Metro, John McEwen, is with us. And from SD 43, School District 43, we have Trustee Carrie Palmer-Isaac, and I think I saw Michael Thomas in the house too. So big round of applause for them. And I also want a special shout out to Dave Teixeira from Dominion Lending, who helped us secure Dr. Cooper today. Dave's been a big supporter of the Chamber, and it's really appreciated. Dave, thanks for all your help. Thank you, Dave. And congratulations on your award last week. Well done. And make sure you check out all the booths during the break of all the sponsors, and we'll talk more about the sponsors in a little bit. But right now, I'm going to turn this over to Carlo Zarrillo, the chair of the Tri-Cities Chamber of Commerce, to bring greetings from the board. Carlo, come on out.
Morning, everybody. Just want to welcome everybody and thank you for spending some time with us this morning. I know we get these going early, but we all know we have businesses to run and we want to get back. So we're going to keep this thing moving. I think everybody knows the format. This is our third year running the Economic Summit here in the Tri-Cities. And I'm very proud to see that every year it continues to grow and build. And I want to thank Paul McDonald and the committee, the Economic Development Committee. Paul, are you in the room here today? Paul? There you are, Paul. Thanks, Paul, and to the whole committee who set this up. I think it's going to be a great day. We got Dr. Sherry Cooper who will come up, and then we're going to have a really cool panel to talk about the U.S. Trade under the Trump administration. Normally we tell you to keep your cell phones off. I will tell you, keep your cell phones on and make sure you're following Twitter, because we may be asking questions live about what Trump's up to, because it seems to be changing minute by minute, and it's turned into quite a gong show. So, and then we're going to go into three exciting presentations from three game changers who then will also be part of a panel. So we're very excited today. I want to welcome you. I want to thank you for coming. And on behalf of the entire board, I appreciate that you've spent some time with us today, and I'll turn it over to Jill, who will introduce Dr. Sherry Cooper. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlo. Good morning, everyone. It's my absolute pleasure to be standing here representing EPR Coquitlam, and we're very pleased to once again be the presenting sponsor of this fantastic event. EPR Coquitlam has been a part of this community for 37 years. Our firm has grown, and we've seen the community grow as well. We've seen great industrial and commercial expansion, which has led to more prosperity, more jobs in our community, and a stronger local economy for the Tri-Cities. And as I said, our firm has grown as well with this community. What started back in the 1980s with Ken Richardson, our managing partner, with a rented metal desk in the back of an insurance office, doing personal tax returns and notice to readers, has become the most respected accounting firm in the region. If you're a business owner and you're not already our client, you should be, and I'm going to tell you why. Because we don't just do tax and accounting. We provide a whole range of services that can help your company grow from a small business to a medium-sized business, or from a medium-sized business to a large one. We help your business rise to the next level. We don't just say we do more, we actually do more. Our whole office works together as a team with the client, your business, at the center. Our single most important goal is to help our clients grow and become more successful. We are all about taking your business to new heights. To this end, we have some exciting new developments in the last year. We've grown our business improvement division by onboarding two incredible talents that we are very lucky to have, Greg Cowan and John Kager, both of whom bring world-class talent and expertise to our team. Greg Cowan, over there, wave, Greg. He comes to us from Deloitte, where he worked all over North America, all over Australia, in the Middle East, and in Africa, delivering business improvement strategy, process improvements to clients in a whole range of industries. In addition to his advisory experience, he has hands-on background in mechanical engineering and forestry, which have enabled him to become an expert at not only finding improvement opportunities, but also implementing those improvements to create actual value for businesses. And John, where are you, John? Over here at our EPR table, come and see us. John is a seasoned management consultant with a decade of experience helping businesses across the country with hands-on business improvement initiatives. His background also includes roles in commercial and private banking, combined with a law degree from the University of Toronto and an MBA from the Ivey School of Business at Western University. So very impressive. Our business improvement services, led by these two amazing guys, include everything that a business needs for strategic, effective growth, including, this is a long list, business diagnostics, strategic planning, operation improvement services, reporting and analytics solutions, management coaching, cost modeling, pre-acquisition preparation, and post-acquisition integration. I bet you didn't know that EPR did all that. We do. We are further differentiating ourselves as the firm of choice by expanding our business transaction advisory services, which include divestitures, acquisitions, mergers and joint ventures, investment structuring, and other transaction services such as debt or equity financing. And we have onboarded more top-shelf talent in this new transactions division of our firm. Walter Schultz, over here, who you'll see more of later when he moderates our Game Changers panel, comes to us from a long and distinguished career at TD in their commercial lending division. And let me tell you, this guy is connected in the business community all over BC. We are very lucky to have him. Also in our transaction advisory services division is Kevin Rathbun. Is Kevin here yet? He's going to be here a little bit later. He spent 8 years with the boutique corporate advisory firm Watershed Capital Partners. He was CFO of Realm Energy International Corporation, a publicly listed company that focused on international shale gas and shale oil explorations. And it was acquired in 2011. He was on the board of New Strike Capital, a public company focused on gold exploration in Mexico, which was acquired by a mid-tier producer in 2015. I had no idea how accomplished all of these guys were until I started writing this, so I was pretty impressed. And these guys are now leading our M&A advisory team. So I know when I first started this that I said that we don't just do tax and accounting, but it is the foundation of what we do. So I have to mention Adam Plank, one of the partners in our firm. He's over there waving his hand. Adam is one of the most knowledgeable, experienced tax experts around. You'd be hard-pressed to find anybody in this community who knows more about tax. He knows everything there is to know about tax, which is good because some of us don't really know much at all about tax. So when I started at EPR in January, I had no idea the range of services and the depth of the offerings that we have here. And I'm so excited about where this firm is going and where we're taking our clients, and I am really, really thrilled to be a part of it. In fact, there is so much exciting stuff going on with our firm, and even more to come. We have big, big, big news, huge. And we'll be announcing that at the end of the month, and huge. We know it's going to knock your socks off. It's big news. So if you want to know what our big news is that we're going to be announcing at the end of the month, make sure you drop a card into our basket over at our EPR table over there, and we will add you to our announcement list. And you will be very excited to hear it. So you'll also be entered to win a $50 gift certificate to Joey Coquitlam. So thank you for coming today, and thank you for coming to this fabulous event and letting me talk a little bit about what we do. I hope you've learned something, and I hope you become our client. And now it's my extreme pleasure to introduce today's keynote speaker. She was also our keynote last year, for those of you who were here, and she was such a hit, and she did such a good job of making her information relevant to the local economy and to the national economy and the international economy that we really had to have her back. And considering all of the chaos that's going on right now in the world, I'm very, very excited to hear what she has to say. Named the Megawatt Celebrity Economist by Canada's National Magazine and repeatedly cited as one of the most influential women in Canada, Dr. Sherry Cooper is the Chief Economist of Dominion Lending Centres. In addition to her award-winning authority on finance and economics, she is a sought-after speaker, writer, advisor, and a professor at the DeGroote School of Business at McMaster University. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Sherry Cooper.
Well, thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be back here again this year. And of course, there is no lack of things to talk about. I, like you, have been just amazed at political developments, not just in the United States. Right here, we have in BC what will likely be a situation that many of us had not expected. I do think, though, that as I get through my presentation, you'll see that British Columbia will continue to be a leader in the Canadian economy. But let's look at 10,000 feet first. Let's look at the big picture. The big picture is that the global economy has picked up this year, and among the developed economies, Canada and the United States are in the lead. We've seen a slowdown in China, Europe's growth has stabilized, and oil prices have bottomed. As well, Brexit and the other international changes are going to continue to be a piece of uncertainty. Global economic growth will run at about 3.2% this year and next, well below the level that we saw in the earlier part of this millennium. But as we move forward, the U.S. will continue to be driving the economic expansion of Canada. There is so much uncertainty, however. As we all know, the Trump administration is under siege. But this is a test for the system of checks and balances in the United States. I can tell you that I'm not a Trump fan. Indeed, I haven't been silent on that subject, and to the great upset of a number of people. But I think it's fair to say right now that the U.S. depends on the stability of the other branches of government. The U.S. economy is running strong, the labor markets in particular. Growth this year in the United States is likely to be about 2%. Growth in Canada will exceed the growth in the U.S. What is driving the U.S. economy right now is the consumer. In fact, this chart shows you that consumption, personal spending, as a percent of the overall economy, is at a record high, driven in large measure by the dramatic decline in unemployment. The unemployment rate in the US is a mere 4.4%, which, as you can see from this chart, is approaching the lows of the previous cycle. To be sure, there are discouraged workers. There are those who are involuntarily working less than full-time. But even the broadest measure of unemployment has fallen precipitously to about 8.5%. When you look at Canada, one of the most amazing developments this cycle has been the continued strength in the job market. Month after month, for more than a year, the employment numbers have come in stronger than what economists were predicting. We've also seen an improvement in exports and a bottoming in the oil sector. But the uncertainty that is generated from the US in terms of the renegotiation of NAFTA, as well as many other components of the very broad and deep trade relationship between Canada and the US, does bode for continued weakness in the Canadian dollar and, of course, a good deal of volatility. Housing also has been an enormous component of economic activity in Canada. And there as well, we see governments across the country taking actions to slow the pace of housing activity, particularly in the Lower Mainland of British Columbia and the area surrounding Toronto. So first, the overall Canadian economy. Rebounding considerably from the mere 1.4% growth last year, we'll see growth this year at about 2.5%, and settling in next year at the long-run potential growth rate of about 2%. This is a chart that I think may surprise many of you. When you look at the population growth of the G10 countries, Canada has the strongest population growth among these regions. Canadian population growth is strong largely because of immigration. In fact, in the 5-year period, including this year, 70% of population growth is attributable to the influx of immigrants. And as we move forward to the middle of this millennium, we will see that virtually 100% of population growth will be immigrant-driven. This proportion, in fact, is going to be augmented by the change in the immigration status in the United States. The current administration is, for all intents and purposes, anti-immigrant. And many of those people, many refugees, as we've seen, have chosen Canada as an alternative. This is an important, very positive fundamental for our economy. The pillars of economic activity in this country have long been manufacturing, oil, and housing, and their spin-offs into the service sector. Manufacturing activity has picked up, but with the financial crisis, we saw massive restructuring in the big three automobile producers to the detriment of auto production in Ontario. In addition, we've also seen announcements just in the past week or so of layoffs at the big three auto companies because of reduced profitability. If you believe many of the scientists, we are headed faster than most people realize to electric automobiles and self-driving autos, which means demand for energy, for oil, fossil fuels, is going to slow over the long term. That's why it is incumbent upon Canada to encourage the growth of the digital economy and all the sectors related to healthcare, education, and the broader service industry. The oil sector in Canada has bottomed. This shows you business investment, which had plunged in Canada as a result of massive declines in oil production, as a result of the plunge in oil prices in the middle of 2014. That was compounded by the wildfires in Fort McMurray. Now, the dramatic slide is behind us, and as oil production picks up, the growth in Alberta will finally turn positive. This shows you job creation in the major cities of Canada. Employment growth has been at the strongest in Vancouver. In other words, the surge in housing is not just the result of speculation, but the result of economic fundamentals. Number two, not surprisingly, has been Toronto. And this has been augmented by the dramatic increase in net immigration to both BC and Ontario as a result of the layoffs in Alberta. The largest number went to this province and meant, again, increased demand for housing. But those numbers now have leveled off. So, looking at the provincial growth rates, once again, British Columbia remains the strongest in the country. Number two, though, will now be Alberta, a growth rate of 2.7% this year and about 2.2% next year, but admittedly from extremely weak levels. Ontario rounds up at number 3 this year. When you look overall at the economies of both the United States and Canada, monetary policy in the two countries diverge dramatically. With the U.S. at or near full employment, the Federal Reserve has already begun to hike short-term interest rates. And it's likely, in my view, that the Fed will raise rates another 1 or 2 times this year, and continuing to re-normalize the overnight interest rate, the federal funds rate, to about 3% by the end of 2019. In Canada, in direct contrast, overnight interest rates have been held firm at simply 0.5%. The Bank of Canada remains very nervous about the sustainability of the Canadian economy. And as a result of that, the Bank of Canada will hold steady, in my view, until the middle of next year, when the Canadian economy moves to full employment. Long-term interest rates as well are much lower in Canada than in the United States, although in absolute terms, long-term interest rates remain at historically low levels worldwide. But when U.S. long-term rates edge up, Canadian rates follow, proportionately by a lower amount, but nevertheless, bond markets trade on a global basis. And so, as long-term interest rates edge higher in the U.S., the 5-year yield in Canada will edge upward, and that means mortgage rates as well. Mortgage rates have been on a secular downtrend since 1982. And though I do forecast that rates will remain low this year and next, they have bottomed and will edge upward, both because of the rise in long-term interest rates emanating from the United States, but also because of government increase in regulatory review of the lenders and what has been a good deal of instability in the lending market. Now, the Canadian dollar has been under downward pressure for some time. First, it was the decline in oil prices, but more recently, there is great vulnerability as a result of what may happen in the U.S. with respect to the NAFTA renegotiation. We've already seen the United States impose export duties on softwood lumber. With that, the Canadian dollar fell below 73 cents. Home capital, another factor. I can tell you that my phone rings off the hook with hedge funds from the United States calling to discuss what they believe is the imminent bursting of the Canadian housing bubble. That's their words. And by the way, they've been believing this for the last 2 years. They don't understand the underlying differences in our housing market relative to what happened in the United States after 2006. They don't understand that the subprime market in Canada is one, very, very small percentage of the total, and two, does require that borrowers have documentation on housing, on assets, have good credit scores. And they don't understand that the delinquency rates on mortgages is at 0.27%. We have seen, of course, the Canadian dollar move down with the decline in oil prices until just this past week, with all of the negative news coming out of the White House. The US dollar has fallen precipitously, which means that the Canadian dollar took a little bit of a bounce. But the lower Canadian dollar has been good from a competitive perspective, as our export growth has been positive. Now let's look at the housing market. Housing has been an enormous component of economic activity in Canada for the past decade. And housing as a percent of GDP, construction as a percent of GDP is at near record highs. We haven't seen this level of activity since the late 1980s. As well, the home ownership in this country is also at a record high. 70% of households own their own home. And nearly a third of those households do not have a mortgage, or they have a very small mortgage with substantial equity in their homes. Many boomers are going to rely on that equity as part of their retirement nest egg. But there are risks. The home capital debacle has been, of course, very painful. However, it is not the result of people who have not paid their mortgages. The reason that the hedge funds had been short home capital was because of their belief that borrowers were overextended and would not be able to make their mortgage payments, which is exactly what happened in the United States. In this instance, however, that had nothing to do with the decline in home capital stock. The delinquency rate at home capital was actually less than the national average, only at 0.2%. What happened instead was an old-fashioned run on the bank, when the OSC announced that it was investigating what it considered to be the inadequate reporting of information by Home Capital, depositors at Home Capital began to withdraw their money. The deposits that were not long-term GICs vanished quickly. And as a result, without the deposit base, Home Capital was unable to make any mortgages and was forced to look at long-term lines of credit that were extremely expensive. Around the same time, the Ontario government announced 26 measures that were going to slow the housing market in Toronto and the surrounding regions. As of April 27th, they announced that they were introducing a 15% foreign buyers tax, just like what we saw here in BC last August. In addition, they have expanded all rent controls to all rental properties, which include condominiums that are rented. By the way, this has made tenants very happy, which bodes well for an election a year from now, but it is a short-term gain politically for long-term loss, because rent control always leads to a decline in purpose-built rental properties. We're already seeing a number of development projects that were online actually be postponed. In addition, it's likely that we'll see in the GTA vacant property tax and a flipping tax. Combine all of that with last week's Moody's downgrade of the Canadian banks, and you can see why the Canadian dollar was under downward pressure last week and why there is more uncertainty about the Canadian housing market today than any time in the recent past. We know that speculative activity, particularly now in the GTA, has been a significant component of housing growth. The other factor, of course, is the continued rise in household debt. This chart shows you household debt to income levels in Canada relative to Australia, the United States, and Germany. It is at a record high. It has edged upward recently, and it is much higher than in those other countries. And this, of course, is the drum that the governor of the Bank of Canada has beat regularly, concern about the overextended household. Most of these households are first-time home buyers. Much of their debt is credit card debt as well as mortgages. And of course, if we were to see a recession with significant job layoffs or a surge in interest rates, there are households that would not be able to make their monthly payments. However, recessions don't lead to high interest rates. And as well, Canadians still have very low delinquency rates. We've seen as well a slowdown in housing activity in Vancouver. Here I just show you the cooling of price gains. That first white dot is the August 2nd introduction of the BC foreign buyers tax. Notice that house prices had already peaked prior to that announcement, and home sales activity as well had peaked. Now, this is the year-over-year growth in prices. It's not that prices themselves have declined, it's that house price appreciation rates have declined. I've also noted the October measures that were introduced by the federal government to tighten the requirements to qualify for mortgages. So in Vancouver and the area surrounding Vancouver, we have seen a slowdown in price appreciation as well as a slowdown in home sale activities. Resales have declined. This is exactly what Ontario is hoping to see in Toronto. What this means is that it's a soft landing as opposed to a collapse in the housing market. The Toronto market hit a dramatic leverage point in early 2016. We saw that price appreciation went from a 10 or 15% rate to now over 30% price appreciation. And anecdotal evidence suggests that much of it was investor-driven, where the investors were purchasing properties for which the rent would not cover the carrying costs. We also saw that the holding period for properties in the region had declined to about 2 years. In other words, a lot of flipping activity was occurring. Hence, the government took action. Notice that in British Columbia, the value of existing home transactions have peaked and come off their top. My forecast is that the slowdown in this region has bottomed, but we will see over the course of this year and next a more sustainable and muted level of housing activity. For Toronto, the early data have suggested that there is already an impact from the late April announcements. But looking at the April price data, you see that Toronto single-family home appreciation is over 31%. Toronto condo appreciation year over year is nearly 30%. And looking at year-over-year data for Vancouver, the condo appreciation continues to be much stronger than for single family at 8%. The issue has long been supply. Insufficient supply to meet the growing demand of new entrants into the housing market in this province and in southwestern Ontario. The reason I say that the government announcements in late April in Ontario has already had an effect is that for the month of April, new listings surged in the GTA by 36%, which is a record. The reason that all of these sellers came out of the woodwork, largely, it may well be those investors who were intending to flip properties decided that there's no time like the present. In addition, anecdotal data thus far in May suggests that new listings continue to rise and the competitive bidding situations have all but disappeared, as potential buyers are taking their time and recognizing that they do not need to get themselves involved in emotional bidding situations. That is exactly what the government wanted to see, and I do believe that that will be successful. My forecast is that this disconnect between average home prices and wages and salaries is not sustainable, and that it will be reflected in a slowdown in housing activity. Now, this looks at Canada as a whole. In 2017, I believe that for the country as a whole, house price appreciation will be just over 10%. And 2018 is where we'll see the biggest impact, single-digit or maybe even net decline in house prices on a national basis. But of course, all housing activity is local. And just to put this in perspective, it's very important to recognize that as much as Canadians themselves feel that the price levels in Vancouver and in Toronto are out of whack with reality, the truth is that in global cities, many global cities, prices are far, far higher than those in Canada. In fact, if you look down this chart, and I didn't put all the cities into this because it would have run over the slide, but you can see that Vancouver is well below cities like Oslo and Rome and Stockholm and the top ones like Hong Kong and London, etc. And Toronto is even lower still. Canada will continue to be a magnet for foreign capital, especially now with so much government instability in the United States. It's just another reason why foreign capital will find its way to this country rather than to the US. Canada's growth is far higher than the developed economies in the rest of the world. And Canada's population growth will continue to be stronger, even though domestic birth rates remain low. This is a positive story for Canada, although, of course, the uncertainties remain, many of them emanating from south of the border. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cooper. Appreciate it. We have time for a couple questions, so if you've got a question out there, put your hand up and I'll come see you. Anybody, come on. Bright people out here, there's got to be some questions. Come on, think about it a bit.
All these shy people.
No kidding, eh? Nobody?
Bill Dick doesn't have a question? I'm shocked. Come on, nothing? Okay, got a question over there, just hang on. Put your thinking caps on, people.
So the foreign buyer tax, when that came in, obviously it stalled the market and scared a lot of people out of the market. In certain neighborhoods, it really didn't do anything. Like affordable housing in North Vancouver, for example, that could be 1.2 to 1.6 million. That stuff just flew off the shelves. Now it seems that just in the last 3 weeks, the market in my neighborhood in North Vancouver, all the teardowns are getting bought up and builders are starting to build again. So we're already seeing houses on really busy streets go up quite a bit. What's your thought on that trend?
Well, as I said, I believe that the correction in the market here has bottomed and that we will see activity resume, but not at the pace, and it was an unsustainable pace that we saw in the first half of last year. Now, again, things can go wrong. There's no doubt about that. There is a risk of overheating again, and then that just enhances the prospects for a hard landing, ultimately, because you better believe the government isn't going to stop introducing dampening actions until things slow. What is good, I think, is that we've seen the slowdown here. But as I showed you, this demand is fundamentally based. It isn't just house investors or flippers. I think the slowdown will drive that component out of the market, or at least reduce its importance. So people have to live somewhere, and not that all the immigrants come in and buy houses. Many of them are looking for rental properties, but of course, often that rental is a condo market. So the system needs to see increased supply. And by the way, the lack of supply is another government issue. It's the direct result of urban planners' desire to maintain the green belt and the introduction of the policy of intensification of building along the transit lines. Another thing that in the GTA is of concern is that the rule right now has been that 45% of all construction has to be along the main subway lines. Well, there's talk that they are going to raise that to 65%, which not only means more condos, but it also means less in the way of lower density construction outside the city. I mean, in fact, you practically need to tear down a house in order to build a single-family home these days within reasonable distance of the city centers. So we've run out of land. And it's not that people aren't willing to commute, because many young first-time home buyers basically get in the car and they just keep driving until they can afford something. And the distance they have to drive has gotten greater and greater.
Okay, over here, Doc. Question?
Thanks, Dr. Cooper.
Welcome.
You might have seen one of your old coworkers, Doug Porter, just did an interesting little example of a young gentleman, married, 2 kids, needed a bigger house in the Toronto area, but basically he couldn't afford to buy anything. This is somebody that was right at the edge of the top 1%, the dreaded 1%, that we have in Canada here. $230,000 income, and he couldn't afford a home. So my question is, where are all the people going to come with the high-paying jobs to afford the next generation of home buyers, given that we're already at 70% home ownership rates? Thank you.
That's a great question. The reason I always emphasize that 70% is to make the point that we aren't headed for 90% home ownership. It's just not possible. It wouldn't even be a good thing. I believe the psychology around ownership versus renting has to shift. That firstly, you need to see a construction of rental properties that are appropriate for younger families as well as for downsizing boomers. You need to see rental properties that have playgrounds and indoor child facilities, not just, the typical thing for single people. Because not everyone is going to be able to buy a home. And the point you're making about, well, if the top 1% can't afford to buy a house in Toronto, who's going to buy it? It's been going on now for a decade that every couple of months you see major media front cover of magazines suggesting the housing bubble is about to burst. The investors, as the purchasers of these properties, are real. They're not some sort of hoax. The demand fundamentals are in fact positive. You'd be surprised at what people are doing. They rent out parts of their home. They've consolidated. They've borrowed money from their parents and all sorts of other things. I know Doug very well, and we worked together for 10 years. Every one of the people in that economics department at BMO own their own home. The youngest of them, a research assistant, bought a very small condo for $350,000 downtown. $350,000, now this was about 8 years ago, was a huge amount of money for this young man. But the fact is, he did. He subsequently has gotten married, and now they've bought a home and a single family home, not an expensive home, but still, people are doing it. Now, it means that they don't have discretionary income. It means that they're counting their pennies along the way. In a growing economy, though, incomes rise, and ultimately, these people are in a position to actually afford the home they're buying. I don't know how many of you who are baby boomers found it easy to buy your first home. But I certainly remember sitting on the bed with my husband, like looking at the prices and trying to figure out how in the world are we ever going to pay this. And the first home I bought was $52,000. Second home was $86,000. You know, you never forget the price that you paid for a home, and I've lived in lots of them. That sounds ridiculous now, but it is a fundamental of what's happened, not just here in Canada, but in the developed world all over.
Okay, we'll try to sneak one or two more in. Jason?
Thanks very much for your presentation.
You're welcome.
My question is regarding the digital economy of Canada. Vancouver recently took over as the primary place, the top spot to invest and start a startup. Could you speak to the digital economy, specifically its effects on the economy and growing it?
It's extremely positive, and that's the point. We can't continue to worry about the buggy whip sectors. This is, in every point in history, there has been change. Change today, though, has accelerated. And it's very important that those who have been laid off from sectors that are contracting be retrained and move into others, and then especially that younger people actually get the kinds of skills that are hireable in the future. Now, that doesn't mean that a liberal arts education is of no value. It's tremendously valuable. It's just that a typical liberal arts bachelor's degree doesn't train you to have skills particular to any field. It takes graduate education. It takes additional on-the-job training. But that kind of training is going to be lifelong. Because 6 months after you get out of the best tech school in the world, if you don't keep up with the changes, you are out of date. And so it behooves all of us to have our own personal MBA program, because it is, in fact, a rapidly changing world. And anybody who tells you what exactly will be the growth sector 5 years from now, let alone 10 years from now, is simply guessing.
Okay, time for
Thank
one
you.
more question. We got one over here.
Good morning. Thank you for that presentation. One question. What is your prediction that will happen to the Canadian economy and housing market if and when things stabilize in the States?
Well, I don't, because housing is local, in fact, maybe the ultimate in local activity, I don't think the U.S. has a whole lot to do with it. One of the fortunate things is, and I do believe this, that the U.S. has had bad presidents before. The U.S. system is more than the executive, even more so than a prime minister in a parliamentary system. In a parliamentary system, if the prime minister has a majority government, his budget is law. In the United States, Trump's budget was dead on arrival in the U.S. Congress, even with a Republican majority in the House and the Senate. It's a messy system. It's why there is little accomplished by the Congress. But in many ways, it was intentionally constructed that way because the founders of the American Constitution did not trust autocratic rule. And so the president has far less power than many believe. What's getting Trump into trouble, aside from his total incompetence, is that he doesn't understand that he has far less power. He thinks he's the boss of everybody. He thinks he can determine what the FBI investigates. There's a reason why the FBI director has a 10-year term. There's a reason why the members of the Federal Reserve Board have 14-year terms, and Supreme Court justices have life terms. It's so that no single power or party can, in fact, implement and change every part of government. Trump did not get his immigration ban, his travel ban, and because of the judicial branch. So again, there are these checks and balances, and I do believe that they will work. Now, does that mean he can't cause chaos? No. Can he affect financial markets? Absolutely. Will he get through much of what he has proposed? No way. In fact, this chaos means that the Republican agenda is also dead. This is gridlock at its best or its worst. It prevents things from happening, but maybe we want to prevent those things from happening. Now, he did just finally appoint his trade representative and his trade negotiator, and so the renegotiation of NAFTA is happening. But, you know, now they say they want trilateral negotiation. It's happening, but the U.S. will not dictate the terms of this negotiation. I mean, the reason that Trump didn't just rip up NAFTA was because finally someone went to him and said, do you see, there are 15 million jobs in the United States that were created by NAFTA. Many of these people voted for you, Mr. President. You rip it up, these people are going to be without work. You really want to do this? In fact, Republicans will admit that the United States has benefited from NAFTA. So has Canada, so has Mexico. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of the day.
Big round of applause for Dr. Sherry Cooper, please. Thanks so much for coming out again, Dr. Cooper, and we're going to make a donation to the charity of your choice on behalf of the Chamber as our way of saying thank you. So another big round of applause for Sherry Cooper. Did a great job. Thank you very much. And what a great segue into our next panel. We're going to move straight into our presentation on Canada and Trump panel. Oh, that sounds interesting. Please remember, we will be using Slido for this, and if you want to move up front, come on up front. So to introduce your panel today, I'm going to invite David Monroe, the Economic Development Manager for the City of Coquitlam, and one of our panel sponsors to come forward. David, come on out here and introduce our panel. There you are. Oh, use that mic right there. David Monroe.
Thank you, Mike. On behalf of the city, I'd like to thank the Tri-Cities Chamber and the team for putting this together, organizing the summit. It's it was very interesting. As I welcome the panel, just want to give you a little bit of a background on each of the panel members today. So Greg Timm is the President and Chief Operating Officer of Pacific Custom Brokers Group of Companies. He's been working in international trade and development industry for 28 years. Greg has built a strong foundation in transportation and has been a General Manager, Vice President, and the founding President of PCB Freight Management. We also are pleased to have James Moore, a Senior Business Advisor at Dentons and a Public Policy Advisor at Edelman. He also serves as Chancellor of the University of Northern British Columbia, is the National Chair of the Canadian Cancer Society, as well as a Corporate Director, and previously served as Canada's Minister of Industry, Minister of Canadian Heritage and Official Languages, and Secretary of State for the Asia-Pacific Gateway. We also are pleased to have Maria Rajanayagam, I practiced that, Chair of the American Chamber of Commerce, and I hope I passed it, in Canada. Maria is the current Chair of the American Chamber of Commerce in Canada, the Pacific Chapter. As a former Executive Director for the American Chamber of Commerce in Sri Lanka, Maria is one of the few Canadians to have ever represented U.S. interests overseas. In her past career, she had the opportunity to brief senior members of the U.S. government, including Joe Biden. Maria is also the founder and president of the Original Garden Broom, an international company. Today, we're happy to have Carlo Zerillo. He'll be monitoring, CEO of the Sandel Foods. He'll be monitoring today's discussion. So please welcome Carlo Zerillo to the stage, as well as our members of the panel.
All right. Thanks, David, for, appreciate that. That's me. All right. So just as they said, so please put your questions on Slido. We're going to leave a little bit of time at the end to ask questions. And the format is we're just going to try and have a conversation here. So Greg, Maria, and James and myself, we met one-on-one talking about the topic over the phone over the last couple weeks. I've tried to prepare some questions, and we'll see if we can turn it into a conversation and really hear about what's happening with trade between Canada and the U.S., especially under the new administration. We're going to try and keep it serious and stick to the trade. However, it's almost impossible to not have this conversation without some of the recent developments. And so we'll probably delve into that a little bit. So why don't we get right at it? So I'm going to start with each of you first. So Greg, we'll start with you at the end. Can you give me just a few minutes on what you and your company actually does as it relates to the topic today with U.S.-Canada trade under Trump?
Yeah, thanks, Carlo. So we are an international trade company, a customs broker primarily. So we assist importers and exporters at a very practical level with figuring out how to import into Canada or ship to the United States and import into the commerce of the United States. The conversation has really taken a turn here in the last 6 or 8 months with the new U.S. administration. So we come at this from a very practical level, not a political level. So we are sort of subject to what happens with the federal government in both Canada and the United States. The political rhetoric that happens sometimes doesn't hit the ground for a long time. So there's lots of discussion now about tearing up NAFTA. We're still working day to day under the NAFTA agreement. There's lots of discussion of renegotiating the dairy deal. It still is what it is. The only significant change recently is the softwood lumber effect, where they have now employed the softwood lumber sanction and dump duty into the United States. So our clients that have imported into the United States in the last 90 days are now paying a back duty of 20% on everything that they imported. So there's some of our clients that owe $1 million that they weren't necessarily prepared for or didn't know exactly how much it was going to be. So those are the practical issues we deal with. The politicians will speak, but until it hits the regulation and gets signed off by Congress or Parliament in Canada, we don't get affected by it, nor do our clients.
Great. So you're right on the nose of this. It's happening day to day. Maria, over to you.
Sure. Thanks, Carlo, and thanks for having me. I'm really delighted to be here today. So I look at it from a few different levels. As chair of the board of the American Chamber of Commerce Pacific Chapter, a little bit about that organization. It is the largest business organization in the world with over 3 million members and 116 offices worldwide. Just to give you some perspective, our office in Philippines and Germany are over 100 years old. Now, having said that, interestingly enough, our offices in Canada are only a few years old, and I think that also speaks to the trading relationship that we have with the U.S. So that's one level. I also, having my own import-export company, which I do have to give a shout-out to Wim van der Zam, because I started in his parking lot at Art Naps just up the street. So exporting to the U.S., I'm also participating in that. And then, of course, as a commercial banker, I do see how the changes in the economy and the political landscape affect my clients. So,
great. James, over to you.
Sure. I spend most of my time at Dentons law firm. We have 130 offices around the world, 6 in Canada, I think 40 in the United States. And the Canada-U.S. trade area is a big part of our practice. We just yesterday, I was dealing with a client who is in Irvine, California, has an engineer, just sort of linking together a number of the things that Sherry Cooper was just talking about. Irvine, California, $800 million in annual sales. CEO is Iranian-American, who is worried about the future of his kids and extended family in the United States as a consequence of Donald Trump's rhetoric, is looking to establish a headquarters in Vancouver, probably 20 engineers, an investment of $50 to $100 million in Canada, and moving forward in partnership with some universities. So they're real on-the-ground application of sort of this macro topic. But at Dentons as well, we have a group of former politicians, and we get together about once every 2 weeks for a call to talk about Canada-U.S. affairs. Former NDP Premier of Manitoba, Gary Dewar, who is Prime Minister Harper's ambassador in Washington, was just retained by the government of Alberta to deal with softwood lumber. And similar dynamic that David Emerson is working with Premier Clark for British Columbia. We have former Prime Minister Chrétien, Stephen Harper, Newt Gingrich in the United States, Howard Dean in the United States. So when we have these calls, turns out politicians like to talk and reminisce a lot. So, but there's a broad diversity of files from lumber to engineering to labor mobility issues and so on. So we have a broad portfolio of clients.
Great segue, James. So I'm going to ask you the first question because you're obviously having these conversations, and I can only imagine that there must be a little bit of head scratching and maybe even having a few drinks now, trying to decipher what's going on, because this has hit the news a lot, from Trump's tirades, to his tweets, to actual actions by his administration against softwood lumber. Should businesses here today that are doing trade or thinking of doing trade with the U.S. be concerned? Or is it really just a lot of rhetoric that's going to smooth out here, over the next year?
Well, Donald Trump is president, so everybody should be afraid. Right. Number one, but it's not ideological. I mean, it's hard. Very often, put it this way, for example, when a company falls apart, you have two partners, and they're negotiating the collapse of the firm. It's often best, certainly in law, is to exchange notes legally, not to have sort of oral discovery endlessly. So actually, if you try to separate yourself from the soap opera, the drama, the nonsense, the bluster, and the stuff of Donald Trump, and you actually objectively look at what he's said, that the reality is we don't know. For the government of Canada, I can tell you, the government of Canada is effectively acting like there's been a bank robbery. They're laying face down on the floor, and we don't really know what's going on. We're trying to figure it out. We don't know if the bank robber is violent. We don't know if the cops have been called and they're on their way. We don't know if they have a plan to get the loot and escape. We don't really know anything. We're just kind of staying still to figure out exactly what the dynamic is and what's going on. That's how the government of Canada is managing this so far. And the reality is, it's not the bluster and it's not the ugly stuff. It's the incoherence and unprofessionalism of the Trump White House that's going to catch up with him. This leak to Lavrov just the other day, the sloppiness, the fact that over 85%, I think it's like 87%, of all mandated White House nominees for basic positions, like ambassador to Canada, like ambassadors all over Europe, ambassador to the EU, at the time that EU was facing a real crisis of identity, that 87% of all White House nominated positions not only haven't been filled, don't even have nominees yet. At this point in the George W. Bush and Barack Obama presidencies, all of those positions have been filled. 87% of them are vacant. He's incoherent. He doesn't know what he's doing. He doesn't have a sense of direction. He doesn't have an ideological compass. And it's his lack of basic understanding of American governance and competence. That's the concern. It's not necessarily a driving agenda on NAFTA. But I would say, but on this subject of NAFTA, if we just isolate it to that, don't forget, Barack Obama ran for president saying he was going to tear up NAFTA and walk away from it. Bernie Sanders ran for president, said he was going to walk away from NAFTA. Gordon Giffen, Bill Clinton's former ambassador to Canada, he made the point that nobody in the United States ever runs for president without saying that they're against free trade, and nobody actually ever acts as president as though they're not in favor of free trade. And so far, other than softwood, which was a time-lapsed agreement, other than softwood, it's kind of been stasis. And so, as I said, if you take away the bluster and you look objectively at what's actually happened on the ground, and you just kind of breathe and put away the nonsense, not much has happened, and we don't know. He's gone from saying he's going to tear up NAFTA to tweak it to a radical reconstruction of it, but nothing has actually been operationalized, and we'll see. And by the way, worse than a possible renegotiation of NAFTA is that Trump is actually standing between a worse proposal, which is by Paul Ryan and the Republicans in Congress, which is to have a massive border tax that would absolutely crush Canadian exports to the United States.
So it begs the question then, James, that, you know, did they really believe they were not going to win? And when they won, they obviously were not prepared with a transition team, because the Republicans won. It wasn't just Trump won, the Republicans won. And is the House against Trump? They're not there to help him. His Republican counterparts in Congress are not there to help him in this transition, that so many positions would be left open?
Never has so much power been invested in one political party with the capacity to do so much, and the party has absolutely no soul or sense of direction. They're free traders, they're not free traders, they're for NAFTA, they're against NAFTA, they're for a border tax, they're against a border tax, they're neoconservatives, now they're isolationists. They demand that we have a repeal and replace Obamacare. They had 7 years to come up with a plan. It fell on its face in the first 100 days of the Trump presidency. I mean, it's astonishing to me how fast the wheels have fallen off the Republican Party.
Right on. So, Greg, you know, you talked about it briefly, but your organization's on the front lines of trade between our two countries. My company, we ship product down to the States. We bring in raw materials. My understanding is the truck crossing has really seized up. What are you seeing and hearing live on the ground versus all the rhetoric that is happening on a political side?
Well, we have many clients that I would say are concerned. They're not stopping, and it's important to say that business is happening every day. There's a demand in the U.S. I remember President Trump, when he was a candidate, saying that he was taking over a mess. And really, Barack Obama took over a mess in 2009. Donald Trump has actually taken over a fairly robust economy. The U.S. economy is doing well. There's a high demand in the U.S. You know, ironically, they need our lumber. Ironically, they need lots of the products that we make here in British Columbia. So it's a unusual time in trade. If they do what they say in the United States and put in a 15% corporate tax, that's going to draw some money home into the United States. But at the same time, they've offended many of their best friends in the world. When they were speaking about building a wall with Mexico, they offended the Mexicans, but more importantly, they offended everybody in South America. All the Latin nations are livid with the United States right now, to the point where they won't buy from them in many cases. Now, they've offended the British, the Germans, the Chinese, the Australians, and they haven't really turned their attention to Canada yet. And it looks like some of the events in the last 2 weeks in the White House are going to throw their trade agenda down the road. Like, they've got to stay alive politically in the United States. So whatever they thought they were going to do with renegotiating NAFTA, as James said, they don't have a trade staff in place. They have very few people even to make the decisions in the United States to change what they're doing currently. So, you know, this could be quite some time if it ever happens. And I can tell you from our feedback, our business is up going into the United States. The amount of clients that are signing up that are, you know, Canadians that are selling goods into the United States is increasing. So while the rhetoric is one way, the actual practical activity is in the opposite direction. Things are pretty good between Canada and the United States still.
So you have a more optimistic view in reality that maybe the border crossing is actually busier because actually trade is quite healthy and going up?
I think, yes. I think, honestly, Canada is pretty well positioned because inherently, regardless of the political branch, Americans and Canadians like each other. We do business well. We speak the same language. We're close. We trust each other. We are, you know, our brothers, cousins, neighbors live there. And there's a very good relationship at the practical level. So we trust each other when we make a contract and buy or sell to each other. And I think that will happen as the U.S. sort of closes down a little bit and becomes more protectionist. You know, we're concerned about the Buy USA influence of, can you sell to a government contract? In many cases, Canadians make things or produce things that sell to suppliers that then sell to the U.S. government, so we may not be affected as much as we think. In some cases, some of the other protectionist policies that they're leaning towards, they may never get to in the next 3.5 years.
I'm actually not that fond of them because they just call me Carlos all the time. They think I'm from Mexico, so they just keep adding that S. Maria, your organization represents U.S. companies doing business in Canada or looking to do business in Canada. What are you hearing from them on the potential of NAFTA falling apart or even just a trade dispute starting? Are you hearing from U.S. businesses anything that we should be worried about?
Sure. Well, typically the AmChams overseas are representing U.S. businesses that are in those countries. For our chapter, we have more Canadian companies that are doing business with the U.S., so we have a little bit more of a different focus because we look at the relationship both ways. And of course, there's a significant amount of concern because of the uncertainty. As James pointed out, as we all know, there's a lot of rhetoric, there's a lot being said. Softwood aside, we've already seen something take place with that, but there's just a lot of unknown, and business doesn't like to know what they don't know. So what we're doing as a chamber is we've put together an event June 13th where we're going to bring up some speakers from the U.S. and really get into the details of, what does this look like? What happens if NAFTA falls apart? Well, from the Canadian side, we do have the Canada-U.S. agreement that we would fall back on. So really we need to look more into the details of the businesses that we have locally, who would be impacted by any significant changes, and what could those changes be? Because right now, all we can do is forecast what may occur, because really we don't know what is going to happen until it actually happens. So trying to demystify and add a little bit of clarity to some of what's going on.
And how about your own business? Are you doing business in the U.S.? Are you bringing up product from the U.S.? And have you seen any direct impact in your own business?
Thankfully not. Yes, I sell into the U.S., but it comes, my product is all handmade in Sri Lanka, so we ship directly from Sri Lanka to the U.S., and so there's been no impact to my business generally, apart from the fact that, the U.S. economy is continuing to grow, and for me, the U.S. is my largest customer for doing business.
Right on. So obviously, James, with your background as an industry minister in the past and now a consultant for some very large organizations, you're very connected to some of the power brokers in government in the U.S. and maybe even the administration, people within the administration itself. Are they telling us to calm down, don't worry, or are they telling us to run for the hills?
Frankly, there's an incoherent president who doesn't know what he believes. It's one thing to have a president. It's one thing to have a president who has a view that is diametrically opposed to Canada's interests, and then we can tactically mount our defense and our self-interest campaign. But when you have a president who literally within 3 weeks has said he's going to tear up NAFTA, it's the worst thing that ever happened to the United States, to saying NAFTA's no big deal, we're going to do a minor tweak, and then now saying that he's going to renegotiate it. The responsible thing for any government is you plan for the worst and you hope for the best. And the truth is, if of course I'm being fair, that the government of Prime Minister Trudeau so far has played their hand exactly right. I thought it was a very shrewd and prudent move when he had his bilateral meeting with President Trump, when he would engage with Ivanka Trump. I think it was a pretty clear analysis of the White House very early on, that it's a very small circle of people who actually have influence over the president's last-minute decision-making. And that was reaffirmed when it was reported and not pushed back by Sean Spicer or anybody else, that it was Ivanka Trump who was emotionally moved by the use of chemical agents against Syrian citizens that caused Donald Trump to finally say, we need to do something about this. So I think that sort of analysis of White House personnel and who really influences the president by the Canadian government is shrewd and smart. And look, people that I know in the United States, frankly, Newt Gingrich, who speaks to President Trump, he has a new book out. God help Newt, but he has a new book out trying to demystify the Trump presidency, but it's a bit of a joke. But even he says that this is a president who genuinely tries to operate the government like it's a business. The problem with that, and you hear this frankly sometimes in Canada, Kevin O'Leary, other people have said it when they say, if you make me the president, you make me the prime minister, the premier, we're going to run this thing like it's a business. Well, that's a really stupid thing to say. because, governing is answering the question, how should we live together? And there's a social contract, there's a collective interest. There are private interests, but there are collective interests. And running something like a business, businesses can make last-minute decisions, cut their losses, hedge, angle, move forward, tack against the winds, make strategic moves, and so on. But there's no necessary real philosophy to that about the collective good at the end of the day, other than what's in the best corporate interest. And that's fine for a business, but it's a horrifically stupid dynamic to bring into government. And you can tell that that's what Donald Trump is doing, is that so he comes into office, clearly doesn't know anything about the Middle East, doesn't understand how the dynamic in Syria and the civil war has emerged, and all the players from Hezbollah in Iran to Israel to Russia to Afghanistan to the Free Syrian Army to ISIS and ISIL, how all these groups have sort of lobbed on into this incredible mess of conflict of horrific consequence. He has no idea what he's talking about, and he tries to listen to smart people and hedge against what is the best outcome. But he has no preconceived understanding of what any of these issues are, including trade. And so I think his instinctive business interest, sort of like a grade 8 negotiator, is just to say, this is the worst thing ever, and we're going to destroy it and trash it and sort of push you way back and move the goalposts, and then he'll arrive somewhere short of that that would be rational. That's likely where we're going to end up, provided that, frankly, Donald Trump is still president a year from now. We don't know. The collapse of the Republican, look, when you go on YouTube and you see in the Facebook feeds, these people who are coming to Republican town halls and swing districts and getting in people's faces and saying, I get up every night and I'm scared to death of what you are going to do. My son, we all have our dynamics, in saying, my son has a pre-existing medical condition. How dare you even think of putting his health in danger and my family's financial future in danger? How dare you? And when you start rolling back those kinds of things, the Republican House is in danger, the Republican Senate is in danger in the midterms in 2018, and frankly, Donald Trump is 7 years old, doesn't know what he's doing, clearly doesn't like the job, in my view, what he's doing. He likes the praise and the bravado. He doesn't know what he's doing. I don't think he likes the job. I think he's 70. I don't think he's healthy. And with that dynamic, I don't think, frankly, he particularly cares.
So you won't be golfing with him anytime soon?
I don't.
Greg, what steps, thinking about the companies in the room or companies that you guys are doing business with, what steps can we take now to ensure that we're prepared for anything that changes, or even make sure we're prepared to enter the U.S.? How can we use you as a resource, and what other resources should we be looking for?
Well, our job is to keep the regulations in our scope. So as the rules do actually change and they hit the ground from the political branch in both Canada and the U.S., our job is to keep our clients abreast of that. So we offer trade advisory services and obviously custom services to get products in and out, shipping services. But to take a bit of a diversion here, I would say that the government of Canada for the last 10 years has done an incredibly good job of opening up free trade with other nations. And if I was a Canadian company, Canadians are so good that we're relatively highly educated, we're fairly skilled, we're disciplined. At times we're a little bit too humble, I think. We're a little bit too bashful to sell our wares. But I would say it's good advice to look elsewhere in the world other than the United States to sell our goods. The government is working hard on trade relationships with China. It's a huge, huge opportunity for Canadians. It really is. And with the new CETA, European Free Trade Agreement, that's going to affect our clients. Now, we're here to talk about the United States, and there's no question that 60 to 70% of our goods go to the United States. It's a strong market, and depending on what happens here with the U.S. political situation, it's going to continue to be a strong market for 4 or 5 years, and there's tons of opportunity to sell to a consumer base in the United States that has a high demand, and they will consume, and they're going to buy their goods from somewhere, and whether President Trump likes it or not, it's not all going to be made in the United States. They have to import. The Walmarts of the world are going to have a different opinion of only made in USA. Unless they want to pay $250 for a pair of socks in the United States, they're going to have to import from other countries. And that, at the end of the day, that it will run through the Congress and the Senate in the United States, and that will mitigate a lot of what is happening from the political bluster.
Yeah, great answer, and a bit of a performance appraisal for you there, James. You got some kudos on your previous job setting up trade agreements. Maria, when we talked on the phone to prepare for the event, you made a great point that you worry for companies in our region that we potentially have too much concentration risk. Greg just talked about it a bit, about how, you know, companies like us can diversify. You know, in your banking industry, what are you hearing, and should we be worried about that we're too focused on the U.S.?
Well, when I mean concentration risk, it also means a lack of diversification in terms of your customer base and your revenue streams. And it doesn't matter if you're a single owner operator or if you're a fairly large company. You should never be complacent with what you have, because running a business is a challenge. It's a risk every day, and you need to look at mitigating those risks on a continuous basis. And one of the things that you do have control over is your concentration risk. You don't want to just have 2 customers. You want to have at least 4 customers. You don't want to just be selling locally. You want to expand geographically. If you're selling only in BC, why aren't you looking at other places in Canada? Why aren't you looking at the US? If you've saturated Canada and the US, why aren't you looking at Europe? You know, you should always be pushing the boundaries. And I think right now, because of all the flux with NAFTA, people are suddenly looking at this going, oh my gosh, the US is my largest customer. Maybe I should start looking elsewhere. Well, you should have always been thinking like that. You should never stop. It doesn't matter if there's chaos, because chaos is just the normal part of life and certainly doing business. So I think from a longevity standpoint of maintaining a business, growing a business owners should always strategically look at minimizing their concentration on one customer or one geography, and make sure that, yeah, I have room to breathe. I can lose a couple customers or a region, and my company will still continue to grow, to flourish, and hopefully one day I'll sell it.
Awesome.
It is true, by the way. You know, 1 in 4 Canadian jobs is dependent on trade with the United States. That's going to continue to be the case. 500 million people in the European market, mostly middle-class folks who have diverse languages like Canada. We have European lineage, particularly in French and English. So we have real opportunities in the Canada-Europe free trade relationship going forward. Canada-South Korea free trade agreement. South Korea, a country of 50 million people. About the size of the province of New Brunswick, so great trade opportunities there as well. And also China. I mean, the government of Canada is leaning forward to try to have, it's going to be a slow burn, because Canadians, frankly, are quite anxious about a deeper relationship with China, and I think rightfully so. Currency manipulation, human rights issues, environmental sustainability, all that stuff. However, but there are some wins with China. Part of what Sherry Cooper in her presentation touched on as well, you know, with every calendar year almost 1 million Chinese join the middle class. And that's going to keep going every single year. It's going to keep growing and growing and growing. And that money is looking to leave because of environmental concerns, human rights concerns. Investing in traditional commodities is not shown to be a great yield. And they're investing in real estate in British Columbia and elsewhere. So the global dynamic of the movement of capital and people in unstable times is a risk for Canada, but there are also opportunities laced in it.
So real quick, each of you then, if I wanted to do business in China or South Korea with the new trade agreement, or the EU, Greg, we'll start with you. Where would I start? Where do I go first? Can I come right to you and say, geez, you know, can you help me? I want to do business in South Korea.
Well, we usually get involved when you have a sales transaction or you're thinking of what you're going to sell for. So we will help you understand your duty rates and your government taxes going into a certain country. So you have to have your product defined and your market defined. The government of Canada has lots of good services overseas to help companies sell. And I would say take a good look at the markets in each country. You know, we've talked about China here a little bit as we divert a little bit, but they have a huge belief in Canadian food products. They know inherently that they've destroyed their own environment, and they view Canada as clean and pristine. And they believe that our food products are top-notch. So if I was a Canadian food producer or seller or packager, I would look heavily at that kind of a market, because there's huge opportunities there, and you'll get a preferential duty rate going in, probably zero. Just as a Canadian, you know, the people here that are doing business in this community, you know, the opportunity in the United States, because it's close market access, we speak the same language by and large. The opportunities are still huge, and we can't understate that. And I would say right now at this point, I would almost discount the political rhetoric and just keep doing what you do.
Right on.
And there's a huge opportunity for people like Carlo to make lots more than they make right now.
Right on. So, Marie, are there chambers of commerces for other countries operating in Canada, and are they in your area?
Yeah, so I mean, from a local perspective, we are here. We try and offer as much information and programming that is relevant to the changes. Like I said, we're having a NAFTA 2.0 discussion on June 13th. That's on our website if anyone's interested. There are chambers of commerce throughout the U.S. if that's where you want to go, and of course we would help facilitate that. And more importantly, as well as throughout the world with 116 offices. The great thing is you can walk into an AmCham office anywhere and say, look, I'm interested to do business in your country. Help me. And they have connections. They'll make introductions. They'll give you market intelligence. And they've been there a really long time, so they know everybody. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. You just have to know to ask.
Right. So, James, in the South Korean agreement, is there an office opening up here that, we'll be able to access, or?
Well, with our Trade Commission services in Seoul and elsewhere, and here as well, but everything they said is true. Local chambers of commerce are a phenomenal network for local market intelligence. Again, law firms as well. You make sure you protect yourself, protect your intellectual property, protect your standing in whatever jurisdiction you're looking to export to, and there's lots of great advice out there.
Right on. So, James, you've been on the nose of these free trade agreements and understand how they work. Just for everybody in the crowd, if NAFTA does get renegotiated, if the U.S. was to renegotiate or pull out of NAFTA, what does negotiation look like? Who's at the table? How are decisions made? Are Canadians just along for the ride? How does that work?
And I'll tell you a name of somebody everybody in this room I wish knew. Probably one of the most impressive people that I ever met in public life is a woman named Kirsten Hillman. So Google her, Kirsten Hillman, exactly how it sounds. She's the chief negotiator for Canada in all of our trade agreements. She was at the table for the Trans-Pacific Partnership, Canada-Europe Free Trade Agreement, and she's still there, and she would be the main point person on NAFTA. Incredibly bright, smart, tough, has defended everybody in this room's interests at the negotiating table. And by the way, Chrystia Freeland, Minister of Foreign Affairs, and then the Minister responsible for Canada-U.S. trade, the Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister, Katie Telford, Kirsten Hillman, and Rana Ambrose, who's now leaving Ottawa as Leader of the Opposition to go to the Woodrow Wilson Centre in Washington. 4 women standing shoulder to shoulder across partisan lines, defending Canada's interests, by the way. 4 very smart, tough women who are very impressive. So what'll happen? So what actually happens is, assuming a renegotiation mandate happens, there will be all kinds of conversations, back channels about what the precise grievances are. Is it supply managed dairy in Canada? Is it that stumpage fees in Canada are too low? Americans will actually have to at some point put their cards on the table. We think we know what they want, but we'll get in the fullness of time. We have our own proactive interests as well that we will put on the table, and we will assert those as well. Whether or not we want to have lumber put into NAFTA at all, we have our own proactive interests as well. And what will happen is the Prime Minister will tell Minister Freeland, and they'll get together a group of cabinet, and this is what we did on the Trans-Pacific Partnership. You'll get a key group of 4 or 5 cabinet ministers together, probably agriculture, public works, industry, finance, and trade, and that group together gives Kirsten Hillman a negotiating mandate to engage with the Americans, and you will do chapter by chapter, sector by sector, from dispute settlement to dairy to et cetera, and you'll have rounds and rounds and rounds of negotiation. They'll come back, and they'll go to Washington and Ottawa back and forth like every week, and have official discussions, backroom discussions, and they'll report to Cabinet. Cabinet will say, you can go this much further, that much further, and then the public interest rests in cabinet ministers through Parliament being transparent and clear about what their go, no-go zones are, negotiating in confidence, and then reporting back to Canadians how far they're prepared to go. And at the end of the day, Canadians will elect a government within certain mandates. And think questions like supply management, stumpage fees, government procurement, et cetera, will be ultimately for the public to decide in the 2019 election.
Awesome. So, Greg, last question to you before we get to some of the Slido questions. Let's spend a few minutes looking at a crystal ball. So we're sitting here a year from now at the Economic Summit 4.0. Are we in a much better place, much different place? Are we watching an impeachment trial. What are we looking at in terms of trade with the U.S.?
I think as a Canadian, I think we go home every night at 7 o'clock and make our popcorn and watch the show in the United States, because I think it is one. I think when the actual rubber hits the road, 36 out of the 50 states, their biggest client is Canada. So when it actually comes to making legislation, when governors in the United States and congressmen have to look at re-election, and if they want to impose a border tax on Canada, I'm sure there's going to be reciprocation, and I'm sure that's not going to sell well in the United States. Really, it seems that most of the focus has been on Mexico, and in some cases, the Americans are not wrong. I think in their free trade agreements or their trade agreements with Japan and Korea, I don't think they've done a good job of protecting their own commerce, and there is some logic to be made there. But they're looking at the wrong place. Their neighbors are not the people that have been beating them up. And I think after the rational second thought or sober second thought, I think we're going to be in the same place we are today a year from now.
Right on. Maria, how about you? Are we in the same place a year from now?
I hope Canadian companies are in a better place, because we shouldn't stop growing and moving forward. It doesn't matter about the noise that's going on. Yes, of course, if there's taxes, et cetera, imposed, we'll have to deal with that. But having said that, I don't think a business owner should ever pause. You need to keep moving forward and growing your business and striving for better things.
Awesome. Real quick, James, how about you a year from now?
Well, who knows? I sincerely, and this is not flippant, I sincerely think there's a 50-50 proposition Donald Trump is still the president a year from now. And the truth is, the soap opera over the American Health Care Act, which is the Obamacare replacement, the soap opera over leaks in the White House, the soap opera over just the lack of staff, the exhaustion, and the mistakes that human beings make under the crucible of pressure when they don't have a boss that they believe in, can trust, and that they think has the best interests of the country at heart or has a clear view of things. The pressure and the constellation of all these things, what's going on now, it can't be sustained. It's not sustainable. And I can tell you, the public may get exhausted of the show and the dance and the stuff, but the media won't, and the enemies of Donald Trump won't, and they shouldn't. And the truth is, as well, as you said earlier, that the Republicans have full sweep control of the government. It's true, but it's fracturing and it's breaking, and it was breaking in the beginning. They have 52 seats out of 100 in the U.S. Senate, but they don't really have a there's three parties in the United States, the Republicans, the Democrats, and the Trump Party. And so far, the Trump Party and the Republican Party are sistered together. But there's cracks in that. When you look at people like Ben Sass, you look at people like Senator John McCain and others, Jeff Flake in Arizona, they don't believe in what Donald Trump is doing, and they're breaking away one by one as they see just the instability. At a certain point, you actually do have to put the country first. At a certain point, you have to realize that tethering yourself to this tornado of crazy is not sustainable, and it's bad for the country. Oh, and it's going to come to the water's edge, and it's going to be bad for you politically. And I think they're starting to realize that now. And as that's happening, as you say, a year from now, Donald Trump's mandate to move forward and do stuff gets smaller and smaller.
Right on. Well, I mean, I could sit here all day and talk to you guys. You've done an awesome job. We'll go to a couple questions here. So I guess the first one is a little bit off topic, but we'll take it anyways. And I guess, Maria, we'll start with you. What are the economic implications of a minority government for BC? Has the recent election done anything in terms of trade, and what are your feelings towards that?
Well, I'm definitely not an expert on that one, but I'll try my best. Well, it's going to be interesting because it's somewhat of a status quo government, and if there were any changes that we're hoping to be made, it'll certainly be a lot tougher to make them, because now you've basically got 3 people at the party. So we'll just have to see how that rolls out.
Okay, great. James, you want to?
Well, I lived through 5 parliaments. 3 of them were minority. The minority government of Paul Martin, 04-06, Harper, 06-08, 08-11. Minority parliaments are good and bad. It's like majority governments are good and bad. The good of a minority parliament that people are sort of attracted to instinctively is they say, well, it causes people to compromise, to round the edges, come together, et cetera, et cetera. True. However, it's incredibly unstable, and business, of course, I think everybody in this room would prefer stability over instability. That's the nature of things, number one. But number two is when you have a minority parliament, people are focused on short-term thinking, not long-term strategy for the country and for the economy. We saw that federally, frankly, under our government and the government of Prime Minister Paul Martin. The unfortunate and fortunate thing at the same time is that we had the economic crisis of 2008, which focused everybody's attention on the economy and the obligation at that point to invest stimulus into the economy. We don't have that dynamic now. So what I worry about is that there's going to be this endless trade-off and a downward spiral of unsustainable promises, whether it's getting rid of tolls or tax relief that can't be afforded or government spending, and that'll just drive the polarization of politics. It actually won't draw people together. So and frankly, if we're speaking bluntly, I think we're deep into the back nine on Premier Christy Clark's political career. I don't know that she runs again, we'll see, but I think we're deep into the back nine of that. And the decisions that she will make to stay in power, given the threat of a minority collapse relative to the public interest, I think that's a bit concerning. The fortunate thing, though, I do have to say, is that after the election, if you actually, and I encourage everybody to do it, if you actually do a deep dive into the Green Party provincial platform, the provincial Green Party, it's actually not crazy. You know, that people have this sort of instinct. It's actually not. The Green Party has come up as an activist third movement that has morphed into a political party, and as a consequence, they actually have a long roster of promises. You know, big brokerage governing political parties speak in philosophic terms, big promises that everybody can understand. Small parties that don't expect a government make a number of boutique promises in the hopes that they can move the needle. And if you go through the list of things that the Green Party put forward in their platform, it's actually very reasonable. $80 million for innovative technologies in public transit, in ensuring cooperations that we have bike lanes and pedestrian walkways integrated with public transit, having an inventory of old growth forests in the province. Like, these are all reasonable things that Premier Clark can accede to, given that the NDP or the Greens have 3 seats, 17% of the vote. They have to be mindful of their limited mandate. They don't get to govern the province because they have 3 seats. But I think if they're reasonable and Premier Clark is reasonable, there actually is a set of policies there that doesn't defend the BC Liberal Free Enterprise base, that is in the fair public policy proposals of the Green Party, that actually can sustain the province for 18 to 24 months. And then you add on top of that campaign finance reform. I actually think even if Premier Clark stays at 43 seats, I think the province is probably stable for a good 2 years.
Great. And that's about the length of a minority government?
Historically, they last 18 months.
Yeah.
Again, this is a minority government in British Columbia. Yes, the Greens have the balance of power, but you know who else has the balance of power is 1 or 2 Liberal MLAs in the backbench. Right. If one of them decides to run municipally in 2018, or one of them decides to run federally in 2019, or God forbid one of them has a health crisis or has a family crisis, or frankly just doesn't like the job. We forget, Gregor Robertson first entered political life as an MLA. He was elected as an MLA for the NDP. He just didn't like it. And he left and he ran for mayor of Vancouver, but he just didn't like it. He didn't like the travel. Dawn Black, you know, she was a federal MP, ran as an MLA. She just didn't really like it. And you go into public life with great aspirations, and so Premier Clark, yes, the Greens have the balance of power, but 1 or 2 Liberals behind her and a by-election that goes badly and the government ends, which is why, again, all the pressure is on Premier Clark to reach out to the Greens, find those reasonable compromises, have something meaningful for, say, a 12 to 24-month governing template, and I think she can sustain it. But it'll take tactics that this province hasn't seen since 1952.
Awesome. And on that note, I don't want to go over time. I will say, Greg, Maria, James, you guys were amazing. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed yourselves, and I hope everybody here enjoyed the conversation. Thanks.
Thanks, Carlo, and thanks to our panel. And we have parting gifts for you, like a game show, courtesy of Pacific Coast Terminals, and they're bringing them out now. PCT's bringing out local parting gifts from local merchants, so that's great. Just a couple thank yous I got to do, and we'll carry on in our panel, our discussion here. Again, a big thank you to EPR Coquitlam for stepping up and sponsoring this event. They're growing. I think they have some big changes coming, as you heard earlier. So a big thank you to EPR. Can I get a round of applause for them, please? Our two panel sponsors are Van City Savings Credit Union and the City of Coquitlam. You're going to hear from Van City in a few minutes, so a big round of applause for our panel sponsors, please. Ted Lau and Ballistic Arts. Ted, are you here? Ted was here earlier. He's in the back there. Thanks, Ted, for stepping up as our engagement sponsor. Our venue sponsor, the Hard Rock Casino Vancouver. As usual, Raj and Steve and the crew here do a great job. It's a great facility. Thank you to the Hard Rock Casino. Our breakfast sponsor is Snap Tri-Cities. Carlo and his crew, thanks for that. Our gold sponsors, we had BTM Lawyers from Port Moody, and we had Canadian Western Bank step up and sponsor, which is great to get them all involved. Big round of applause for them, please. And our in-kind sponsors were the Tri-City News, Butter Studios, and Sandpiper Signs and Decals. So without all of you, thank you very much. We couldn't make this happen, so thank you very much. Big round of applause. We are going to take a 5-minute break so you can refresh your coffee, see the booth, see the people, and we're going to come back with our last panel, the Game Changers, 3 great stories and a discussion. We promise to have you out of here by 11:30, if not a little bit earlier. So take a 5-minute break and we'll be right back. Thanks a lot.